Hello, everybody. This is mentor lawyer James Wachewski, also known as Mentor Lawyer on YouTube. I'm here with Ruth Markel, and we're going to have a talk today. We're going to discuss many things, including the upcoming 10th anniversary of the horrible murder of her son, Dan Markel, here in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm a lawyer in Tallahassee where the murder happened. I went to the same law school where her son, Dan Markel, taught criminal law and other subjects, but criminal law was his passion. And I actually played tennis nearby from where Dan Markel and Wendy Adelson lived, had a home, had their two boys, raised those two boys. I've actually taken my son to the same playground over there at Winthrop, where those two little boys got to play as they were growing up with a mom and dad in their home. Sadly, that marriage had troubles. Wendy wanted her freedom and decided to divorce. And unfortunately, the divorce was acrimonious. And it ended up in 2013, the divorce happened after very contentious litigation. And then in 2014, about a year later, Dan Markel was murdered as he was in his garage talking on the phone. Sigfredo Garcia, allegedly, or Luis Rivera, has never been established 100%, but one of the two got out of the car of a Prius and approached your son and murdered him. And this case is, of course, reaching the 10th year anniversary of the murder, and justice for Dan Markel is still not finished. There's still a lot of work to do on that front, and currently we have Donna Adelson in jail at the Leon County Jail. She's the former mother-in-law of Dan Markel, and she's waiting for her trial for her alleged involvement in the murder of Dan Markel. That case is set for trial in September of this year. And I'm assuming, Ruth, you're going to be here for that trial, of course. So
yes, we'll be in Tallahassee.
I will be seeing you in person hopefully soon. So anyway, we have a lot of topics that we're going to talk about, and I'm going to list the topics, and then I'm going to let basically Ruth take the floor and just talk, and we may have a few questions for her as we go along. But here's the general list of the topics that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about some changes for the Justice for Dan organization. We're going to talk about the Markel Act, or the Grandparents Act, and the fact that other people in similar situation have reached out to you, Ruth. So you want to talk about that, and you want to talk about your advocacy for other grandparents in similar situations where someone used murder to try to, in essence, solve a custody battle, and you have the family of the victim having to fight for access for the kids of the murdered person. We're also going to talk Ruth is going to give us an update on media issues regarding the case, not only about how she views that the case should be covered, or her perceptions at least, or her thoughts about that issue, but also about shows that may be coming up. I believe that's what she's going to be talking about. And if I haven't mentioned that yet, she's going to discuss with us what are the plans for the upcoming 10th anniversary. It's something sad you don't want to celebrate the murder. You want to celebrate the life and, of course, the milestone of how long now you have been without your son in your life. So that's what we're going to cover today. So, Ruth, why don't you give your introduction and just tell us what you want to talk about first?
First of all, thank you for having me. And it is really it's bittersweet, the fact that the 10th anniversary is coming around. I mean, for me, it's a very sad time. It's sad for our whole family because nobody really likes to feel the anticipatory grief, and it does revive and open up wounds. So I won't say that. The other side of it is we're coming to more trials and more effective justice, And there are, some similar updates just to recognize that we are moving forward in a very difficult, complicated situation. So that, I think, is really like sort of the bit of a backdrop to some of the issues related to the 10th anniversary. And I want to talk a little bit about some of your contribution, and that's one of the reasons I actually selected or chose. I always, I dance on all of the podcasts, and I appreciate the support. Our family has benefited so much from everybody's really, and I say we have a Dan Markel community from the listeners, and we definitely have a very large Dan Markel leadership in terms of the podcast, in terms of a lot of other media. And we're very appreciative. And we have I call it a silent partner. The media is, in our case, it's been positive, not everybody's stories. So we have really a very positive relationship with the media. And I do want to thank you, because as far as some of the podcasters go, we look at history now, it's 10 years. And you were one of the first ones out. So like in the smaller, when I say smaller, I mean not 2020 or Dateline or stuff like that. But so, and I'm a favorable person to small business anyway, and entrepreneurship and small initiatives that become bigger. So thank you. And I say that wholeheartedly, that we are blessed with all your follow-up, and it's a long time already. I asked you before around when did you start, and you said about 2019. So these are all 5-year anniversaries. Like I look at the situation in terms of how many people have been around with us for very long periods of time. So thank you again, and I'm thanking you publicly.
Oh, thank you so much. And I did actually, I think I heard during the sentencing, Phil spoke about it, and I think he mentioned me, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Okay, well, we do. And I'm sure your audience has, and others as well, because I think that everybody is really following. They follow very seriously the Dan Markel murder. We have the audiences and the opportunities are just spreading widely, and so that's really a very nice thing for us to feel that. And if we're really in a positive situation relating to the media, because of the fact that it's been very supportive to us. And on very few occasions where we choose to use the media just to talk about our own concerns, the family never went out to the media in the first 2 years before any of the arrests. And that was by choice. And I often use the phrase about going public. Going public means using the media. I actually want to talk a little bit about some of the highlights of where we are currently. And one of the things, as I talk in my book, The Unveiling, A Mother's Reflection on Murder, Grief, and Trial Life, you've talked about grief, and I've talked about the trial life, and I haven't talked that much about the media and our relationship with the media. So that's a little bit of my purpose here. One of the things I have to say is, because the case before even was glamorous and glitzy, there's been a very continuous interest in it. That interest has broadened. It's becoming much more international today, and other countries are wanting to do programs and get more stuff in print. So this is really where, this situation, which is a sad situation, has a lot of legs in the media environment. Let me talk a little bit about two things today. The biggest change in news in the sort of coming up with the 10th anniversary context is the Justice for Dan. So Justice for Dan was a site that evolved, and it's social media. This is another thing which we have to say we're thankful to, as we have the formal media. The case has been written up, all the way from the New York Times to all of the other very large international print, and also all of the TV and so forth. But the importance of the social media dedicated to Dan, and I think that was really Justice for Dan's purpose when they came out. And Jason Solomon and his leadership has been outstanding. And Karen, in the later years, has really been a very active person and a backup sometimes to Justice for Dan. But there really is a new thing happening. Some people might have seen it in one or two previous sort of descriptions that came out very, very recently. So Justice for Dan has now incorporated in the state of Florida, and it added some new leadership to the board. So two names that sort of have been around in the last little while, Jared Ross and Tamara Demko, have joined the Justice for Dan as co-directors. Okay, so Tamara goes back a long way to Dan and met him in Harvard College, and Jared was actually a personal friend in Tallahassee. So that sort of is the new news in terms of the Justice for Dan leadership. And they're both attorneys, and they're both interested in advocacy in the case. And here's their nonprofit mission is to advance justice for Dan Markel and the family. So that's important, the advancement of justice. And they've done that, all the years to memorialize Dan's life and scholarship. So that's another function they are using, and will be adding special projects and new initiatives, and also to serve as a credible resource on the commentary side. We've had over the years the privilege where Justice for Dan has always posted, some very relevant new descriptions, new information, new legislation, some material coming out of the trial, and so forth. So this is a really new face, is a good way of putting it, on the whole Justice for Dan work and initiative and so forth. And I think they will be looking, I think, to develop, and I don't know what the project is yet, but I leave that to them, some kind of an advocacy project for the 10th anniversary of Dan's murder. So that's a new thing, and it's important because it's really coming out of Dan's friends. It's like his peer group who've taken on this really strong interest. I mean, this is 10 years. So to have this level of support from this whole community, but specifically from certain close friends, it's really a really, really important. So I use the word blessing. I don't usually talk in terms of blessings, but it is a blessing. It's a gift. It's really a gift to our family. So as you know, Dateline and 2020 have been doing all kinds of programs. There's another program coming up, which you should be able to watch in the States. I clarify because the Canadian audience might not get it. On June the 12th, which is around the corner, it's called Killer Cases, and it's from the Law and Crime Network, but it's coming out on A&E. So I think all the American audiences can get that. So that's June the 12th. Coming out and it's on the Dan Markel story. That's really, I'm sharing that only because I know the focus point is on the Dan Markel story, and that was taped way back over 6 months ago, but it's coming out now on June the 12th. So that's the most formal media news, and there's a lot of other requests that are coming in internationally due to the last part of last year of 2023 certainly had so much international interest and print and so forth. So I think that's going to continue, and I think there's going to be more people at the trial. That I think you're going to see probably a big change.
So in general, talking about media, that our channel, we don't do a once a year video or something like that. We continue to cover your son's case in depth throughout. And I always, when I have an idea, we just get done and finish the video and do it. So I just published part 1 of the cross-examination of Wendy Adelson by Dan Roshbaum, the last trial. We're doing part 2 this week. And one of the interesting things that I saw in there, that I'm going to do a separate video where I actually do a little bit of analysis. I'm just going to share this with you. So like some of the analysis that you do by doing such a deep dive and revisiting the testimony several times, is because you find things that maybe if you just watched it live, you didn't notice. So one of the things that was funny, I remember it kind of like triggered my brain when I first heard it was, I think Wendy Adelson was being asked questions by Dan Markel, and the point that he wanted to get from Wendy was that Charles Adelson was telling the joke about hiring a hitman in front of Katherine Magbanua when they had dinner together with, it was Wendy, Professor Lacasse, Katherine Magbanua, and Charles Adelson. And Wendy messed up. She says, "Oh, I think that he might have said that joke, especially if I said something about the TV being broken." Like this was in March, several months before the murder, right? And the TV was broken, like supposedly a couple of days or a few days before when somebody broke the screen. So she's in her testimony trying to justify the fact that her brother told this joke way back in March of 2014 because she might have mentioned that the TV is broken, which makes zero sense. Of course, it could be that she just messed up, but I'm going to be pointing out a few errors that Wendy made in the examination and a few things that are of interest. Anyway, so that's coming up soon. I'm going to be doing a more careful analysis of the cross-examination. Yeah,
I think what's really good. If you could list, I don't know how like you sort of list some of the current podcast topics and links. That might be very helpful, and for people to follow, because I know you've been doing excellent videos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're welcome to. I mean, I don't watch. I don't have enough time to watch other people's stuff.
No, I'm talking about your stuff. Your stuff.
I mean, I have probably like 250 videos.
I know.
So,
but then what you should do is don't miss this month's videos because they're coming out, that kind of way with a list, like highlights,
Yeah, sure.
That kind of thing.
I should probably do something like that. That's a great idea. Thank you so much. Anyway, so we talked about the media and what's coming up. We talked about justice for them. So what about, let me go back to the media. I wanted to make one point. You took some time to thank me for my involvement in covering your son's case. And I just wanted to make a couple of points to you. As a person who runs a YouTube channel, who is a lawyer, a trained lawyer, a professional, who has also ethical and professional obligations, I try to be very objective in my coverage of any case. I'm not trying to advocate. I don't advocate for one side or the other. I want justice to be done, but justice to be done fairly, right? So let me close my email so we don't get those interruptions. So I want justice to be pursued fairly. One of the things that maybe you can talk about is how do you feel when the media, as the mom of a murder victim, how do you feel? What is the right protocol you think for somebody like me to approach you? So, because I'll tell you my philosophy, right? So I've covered the murders of many people. Most cases that I cover, very few people talk about. They're ignored. They're not on the media. So I cover a lot of cases that actually families have come to me and thanked me for the fact that I'm the only person ever who has actually published the trial of the murder of their son, sister, brother, whoever. And they're very thankful because, people from all over the country who may have a relationship to this victim who cannot come to Tallahassee are able to see justice being done for their loved one. Right. So I've seen the appreciation, but I've also know that there's a different side to it, right? Some family members may feel that here's a YouTuber or a lawyer or somebody trying to exploit the murder to try to make money, to try to get views, to try to get subscriptions. And so, for example, I'm very careful about approaching the family of a victim. I think that it is, in my personal view, it is a situation where I kind of want to have that family member take the lead. I show myself as a friendly person. When you see me smile to you. But I try to be respectful and keep a distance and then let you be the one who says, "Hey, listen, let's go have lunch together, whatever, or let's talk, or let's
Right.
do it." So, what is the right balance, you think, for the media when they deal with members of a family who have lost a loved one for due to murder, and they want to cover the case?
I'm going to answer that in actually several ways because there are different points and times. So, if it's not a trial, remember one thing, and we haven't had too much. How would I say it? Over pushing us at the trial in itself to talk too early. We had to put limits from the very beginning, only at the trial. We are very, very open to a lot of conversation throughout the year, but excuse me, I know something
Sure.
caught. But in plain English, the trial is traumatic to the family. So it's re-victimization, and the sensitivity, I would say, if I had any encouragement to all of the podcasters and the media who sit in front of us, don't forget we're sitting at the trial, 3 rows in front is the media, is the fact to remember that we are suffering in the midst of a trial. Now to talk to us, now to speak to us, and so forth. But as soon as we start to have to wear the trial hats, they'll call it, and it comes up soon. Like we're coming up, there's going to be in July a case management. Like our guts, I can talk for myself. I can actually express it as I get closer to any of the events of the trial, the pre-trial. We're also dealing, in this case, it's so close to the 10th anniversary, which is very traumatic for us. And so it becomes a cumulative re-traumatization. And I think if I can sensitize anybody who's in media to those moments are not the same moments as 6 months before, 6 months after, or all year round. And so that would be my only, what I'll call cautionary concept in terms of approaching the family. It's really difficult during a trial. And we have had a very successful arrangement with the media who sit in front of us. In the first trial, it wasn't so easy. And then I said one time, look, let us do the comments because they're in front, as you know, you're sometimes there yourself. The first 3 rows and everybody's there. And as the trial becomes more exciting for the public I'm talking about and for the media, it expands, and then there's an interest of some of the people to get to you first, right? There's always somebody wants to get the first, information or contact with the family. So we've actually really developed a very nice working relationship or understanding that we're not saying anything until after the trial, which we do. And you see us in the hallway, and we're kind of prepared. We have to go write a statement many times and so forth. So the impact of the trial on the family at the moments in the trial is hard. And it's very different than other times. So if I can broaden the sensitivity or the compassion, we're dealing with a murder. We're dealing with the loss of a son. We're dealing with deliberations. That's enough to give you a heart attack as a family member. It's not just, everybody else is waiting to hear the verdict. I mean, you're sitting there. This is not just waiting to hear the verdict. So I think that those are, if I could say, like in general, it's a generalization on how I could talk, certainly how I feel. I would say we should put on more boundaries, and you should respect more boundaries in the moments of the trial. And otherwise, I can only talk for myself, but I think, Phil for sure would relate to opportunities to discuss, we all have different styles in terms of how frequently we come out or how much we want to say and so forth. There are different points. But I can only say that the trial time period should be the most respected.
Okay. Do you have any issue with the humor? Judy, for example, likes to use humor to bring attention to the case, and some people take a big offense of that. Obviously, they know that this case involved a tragic death, a murder of a son, brother, father. Do you have a problem with humor that is really obviously not targeting what happened to your son, but targeting the people who were involved.
I actually have not so much the humor. I actually did a with Judy I did a podcast, a video, I should say, with John Steinbeck on social media and the children and the younger generation. The big change, and I think I would say it again here. Not everybody likes to hear it, but I want to say it. Um, you have all the podcasters. Everybody now has a much wider audience since Charlie's conviction since Donna's arrest, for sure. So Dan's children, Benjamin and Lincoln, now know something. Before they were much more protected. Whatever they know, whatever the family tells them, even if they know they're in jail, and whether they believe that the family did anything, because that might be what they're not saying to them, that they're responsible, but doesn't matter. They are aware. Their friends are aware. I could tell you an example of my 18-year-old Canadian granddaughter who goes to school during the trial. The teacher is aware because he might have known Dan and he might be the same age. But every one of her friends' parents, plus her friends mainly, they're watching this trial. So what I'm trying to say now is the audience has widened. The audience has widened to a younger generation who is now your audience. And so I've said it publicly, I could say it again. I just want the podcasters to recognize that when you're, and it's not humor, it's other comments than the comments from the audience. Let's recognize that we are now in a new era, and there's new eyes and ears who are listening and watching the programs. I mean, you have young children, somebody else has younger children, and and this is where they do hear things, right? And so this is where I think if there's some broadened awareness about it's not the specifics, but it's just that there is a new audience, and that's how I'm going to answer your question. So it's not the poking of humor or the poking of fun. It's just a recognition that I don't want the kids to get bullied because of what they're hearing coming out of these sort of people who are in the support community of Dan Markel, and we were so appreciative. So that's the kind of I guess it's a question of taste related to a newer audience. That would be my message.
But you personally, do you have any problem with it?
I don't have any problem with it. I think I'd like to draw the line between certain types of humor. Like, in other words, the humor about the humor is fine. There's a lot of, imitating the accents to this, to that. But as long as, attack, anything, we're sensitive today. Attack, hate stuff is where we don't want to have that as part of, Dan Markel's legacy even.
Of course, I agree. All right, thank you. So the next issue that we were going to talk about is the Markel Act, the grandparents' rights litigation and advocacy they have done. What do you want to share with the audience about that?
I want to share actually, and this is good news. So the act is, while we're not using the act for our own situation, and it doesn't quite apply yet anyway, but the act is actually very well appreciated in a wider audience, and there have been many calls related to it. Many of them fit the criteria, which are very specific in this case, which is that there should be some charges related to civil or criminal. And what is happening where it can't be applied, some families where there has been murder, but the spouse, because the spouse has to be labeled, that's the issue here. There's got to be the death of one person, and the spouse, the surviving spouse, has to have some of these implications civilly or criminally. What has happened is there's been a few cases where that has worked and that the legislation has helped people. We've given them access to legal aid and different groups who could support their continuing with the process. But there are also a couple of cases where it is murder. It's had to be reviewed to be murder, but the spouse, the surviving spouse, has not been named by the police. So it's those circumstances that really, and the family can become disappointed because and I should also say, this is not a big grandparents' rights piece of legislation. It's very narrow and it's very specific and it's very useful, but it doesn't cover every family who has estrangement with grandparent issues. And it's huge now as a social problem, and I'm separating the conversation from murder, but there's a lot of social issues today around estrangement in families, around post-divorce custody. And as you know, the Dan Markel case had all of those things about brainwashing and so forth. But the early kinds of situations are not where the Markel Act fits. They only fit after the murder and the other circumstances, I should say, the legal and the civil and criminal implications.
Right. The situations where there is a murder and there is sufficient evidence to indicate that the other surviving spouse was involved in the murder. All right. So anyway, before we go to the 10th anniversary plans that you have or that are in the works, I wanted to ask you about Benjamin and Lincoln, and any updates. When was the last time you or any family member of Dan Markel's family has seen them? How is that going? The contact with them.
The contact has been intermittent, but Shelley and her family were the last to see them. So they just saw them in February, and Shelley and Ian and her youngest daughter, who's 18, who's closest in age to Benjamin, had a visit. My interest at this point is, besides some of our own visiting, but I want to make sure that all the younger generation cousins get to meet each other. And so this was this when Shelley and her daughter just met them in February last year. Phil went with Shelley's son. She only has one son, so to meet them. So the idea being, it's not just that we, the grandparents, continuously see them and nobody else gets to meet them, because I'm not sure everything might be solved in our relationships with Benjamin and Lincoln in this generation, meaning the elder generation. But there's going to be a long-term, they're all growing up, and my hope, and this is really my hope is that these introductions of all of their cousins will really be something that they see them as adults, because we did some pictures for them a while ago, and it was funny because the last time when they were 3 to 5 years old, that they saw, let's say, Shelley's children, who are then now 19, 20, they only know them as 10-year-olds, right? So they would never even recognize them on the street both ways. So I think that that's really what my intent is, to kind of keep the family at least having a recognition, I'll call it, like face recognition of each other in each generation.
Okay, there have been indications, obviously it's actually shown on the Florida Department of Corrections website, that Charles Adelson was moved to South Dakota. Do you have any information or knowledge about that you can share with the audience?
I do. I can only say that, people had speculated, about the whole issue. There was that is going to be a hit. This is not coming from law enforcement, but there was on TV. STS and some of the others had some programs. So the idea that there was going to be a hit and the idea that there was going to be extortion was covered and mentioned in a few weeks ago. I think maybe even a few months already. The one thing that I did hear more formally is that they do make these kind of moves for inmate safety. See, I have a hospital background. I'm still in my old world, but for inmate safety. So I think that's really, that I would say is probably confirmed.
Okay. And then as far as, there's a lot of rumors, and I hate to go with rumors, but there's rumors that Wendy may be moving to Texas. Do you have any actual knowledge about any of that, or you don't?
No, I did hear all the rumors, and that, but I have no firm knowledge.
Okay. And then, so what did you want to say about the plans to celebrate this grim anniversary of the murder of your son, the 10th anniversary coming up in July?
Well, I think I think that I'm going to actually, I believe Justice for Dan will come out with the projects very soon. I can say that. I don't have any plans in Tallahassee yet. We will probably, the family, Danny's buried in Canada. He's buried in Toronto. So, and the Jewish tradition, it's called a yahrzeit when there is an anniversary of a Jewish death, will come up. It won't be July 19th. In fact, I think it'll be quite a bit later this year because our calendars are different. So most of the holidays this year have been much later as a result of a different calendar. So we don't use the Gregorian, I say it right, calendar. We have our own. And at that point, when it comes up, there's usually a sort of a couple of days of when you memorialize the person by going to synagogue, and there's several prayers to do in the evening and on the same day. So I think for sure the family will do the religious, let's call it, the observant parts of the rituals, and then we'll see actually in terms of what I call it the public will do. I don't mean the public in Toronto. I mean, I would say the Tallahassee groups,
Sure.
They want to do something. They had stuff very nice. I don't know if you remember, they did something in the park where I think that was the 7th year anniversary, where they had a bunch of toys at like an annual toy raising event.
Yeah, that's the park. That's the park where I go play tennis all the time, and there's a bench with a plaque for your son there and everything.
That's right. That was what they did. Each year something different is happening, and I'm sure there'll be more news. I don't have all the updates, and I think really everybody's in the pre-planning, sort of formulating. If people in the public have some very creative ideas, it's open really now. It's not like where we've closed off all the thoughts about how to memorialize Dan.
Well, so in talking about, you made me think about the beginnings of my YouTube career in a sense, and I can tell you the case that got me started thinking about doing a YouTube channel was a 2014 murder in Tallahassee of a spouse who was an immigrant, and it wasn't your son. It was
Right.
Samara Fresh. It was
Right.
actually Samara Fresh. So we had two horrible murders of immigrants in 2014 here in Tallahassee. Dr. Adam Fresh, who was convicted for killing his wife in Golden Eagle in 2014. She was an immigrant who came from France, but originally from Madagascar. And then, of course, we have the murder of your son in July of 2014. So the first case that I ever talked about on my channel was probably the Samara Fresh case. But even if it wasn't the first case that I talked about, I may have talked about the Mike Williams murder first.
Right.
But those two murders have played a significant role in the development of this channel, in the sense of wanting me to reach out, because in both cases I saw injustices being done. I saw an injustice being done in the Samara Fresh murder case because the family of the victim was in Madagascar and people were taking advantage of that situation. The kids were taken to Nebraska and they're still with the family of the killer. The family in Madagascar never got to see them since, and even the life insurance money was paid to the killer, which is outrageous. But that injustice is what got me really the idea to actually go on YouTube. And then, of course, in your son's case, it was the fact that I watched that trial, and it was pretty obvious that the state of Florida, the prosecutors believed that this was all set up by the Adelsons, but yet nobody had been charged. So that was another injustice that made me decide to talk and to evaluate and objectively discuss the case and see what is the issue. Why hasn't anybody in that family been charged? So anyway, thank you so much for being here. It is awful that we get to meet because of your son's murder,
Right.
but I'm very appreciative of the relationship that we have established, that we have met, and you are a wonderful person, and you're always welcome to come back and advocate for your son and for other victims' families.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come. And I'll call it an open invitation. I don't know if I extended my rights too far as an open invitation, but certainly I'm interested, and it is really, really, really a very important thing to have your contribution, but the support and the interest and the continuous interest. So we are very, very much indebted to you and the whole. I'll call it now. It's getting bigger and bigger all the time. The big Dan Markel community with the followers. The followers are so dedicated, and it's a privilege. It's really a privilege.
Thank you so much again. Okay. All right, Ruth.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks everybody for watching. Until next time, Mentor Lawyer. We're of course going to cover the case management conference coming up in the Donna Adelson case. And hopefully we'll be at the trial and we'll get to meet with Ruth again. Thanks everybody. Until next time, Mentor Lawyer.
Thank you.